So this morning we are continuing a series that we started last week called Selfless. We're looking at 4 different things that we can be very selfish about, but that we need to maybe in this new year become more selfless in those things. Last week we talked about, and it actually was last year technically, the 30th, so I didn't misspeak. On the 30th we talked about how we are bold in our testimony, being bold in what we believe. The common theme through that one was we speak boldly about what we believe deeply. And so what do we believe deeply, and what is so important to us that we can't help but share it with those around us? From our nice shoes, man, these are the most amazing shoes ever, or a great restaurant we go to, we share those things easily, but do we share what we think of Christ to those around us boldly? And that was kind of the thought for last week. How do we selflessly share boldly our faith? This week we're going to be looking at faithful in service. And the question I have for us this morning is, what would others say that you are always doing? This is a good question I think we could ask, and especially when we're looking at starting this new year. What is it something that we are always doing? When people look at us, they say, this person always does this. This person is always involved in this. They're always reaching this. They're always doing this thing. What is it that is for us? And if we look at what we did in 2018, what was it that we always do? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I think some of it would maybe be like, well, that's a good thing that I always do. But maybe there are some things that we always do that maybe aren't such a good thing. And so as we reflect on what we did in 2018, we are almost a week into 2019. And it's funny because I see people posting and saying, you know what, can I start the year over again? It's only been 5 days, but can I have a redo? And it's funny because I look at that and go, you know what? That's the thing about Christ, is every day is a redo, right? I mean, that's the thing. Like, I don't have to have a new year to have a fresh start. I don't have to have a new year to not worry about the past anymore. I can be present today and say, you know what? Because of Christ and because of His blood, today is a new day, and I can be somebody new. I can do something new. And so as we look at this and we think about this concept of what would people say that we do, as we reflect on this, how would people think that we act? Are we encouragers? Now, this for me is not one of my strong suits. I am not the best encourager. What would it be? Griping and complaining. What is it that we always do? Are we griping and complaining? Do we find the good in everything? Are we always working? Are we always on social media? Are we always sharing our faith? What is it that we always do? As we think about those things, it's funny, I came across this article, The Art of Self-Promotion, 6 Ways to Get Your Work Discovered. This is by Forbes. Self-promotion is a skill. And 40 ways to self-promote without being a jerk, which I like the title of that one, without being a jerk. When we look at what it means to be different this year, we're going to talk today about being the GOAT. Now, I don't know if you've all heard the term being the GOAT. What that means is GOAT stands for greatest of all time. So when you talk about being the GOAT, being the greatest of something of all time, it was interesting. I was reading this thing, and it says that 54% of teenagers today want to be YouTube stars. YouTube stars. They want to be the greatest. They want to be the greatest YouTube stars ever. They want to come out with the next viral video. They want to be the greatest at this. They're seeking this opportunity to say, I want to be the greatest at this. And we look at what that means to be the GOAT. We can look at plenty of things, and I'm not the authority on this, but if we were to have a discussion today on who is the greatest of all time when it comes to a musician, there would be probably a list of people that most of us would probably say, yeah, I could put them in the top 20. You know, I could say that these are the top 20 greatest musicians of all time. But then we probably would have differing opinion on who's number one. And it would be the same thing with sports. You know, if you look at the greatest of all time, who's the greatest basketball player of all time? Many would say, well, it's got to be Michael Jordan, right? It's MJ. He's the greatest of all time. Now, some people would say that it's LeBron James now, and he's the greatest of all time. Some would be like, well, no, I think it's even Larry Bird or Magic Johnson or some of the older guys. But we have a different opinion. And when you look at like football, who is the greatest of all time? And, you know, we know who she thinks. I tend to agree, so she's right because I got the mic. But you know, you look at these people and they're like, well, the greatest of all time. And it's funny how it's always the current people. You know, they're like, well, we've never seen anyone like this before. And it's like, well, but there were people before. You know, yes, there were the Joe Montanas and the John Elways and the Marinos and all these guys. But yeah, sure, maybe Tom Brady's the greatest of all time, or you know, Aaron Rodgers. Yeah, that's the right one. But who is the greatest of all time? We all, I think, when we are raised, and this is, I'm getting to the point here because our main verse that we're going to spend the most time on today it has to deal with this. But when we're young, and even maybe now, you know, we didn't wake up and go, you know what, I just want to be average, right? I just want to get up, pay the bills, do all these things. Like, I want to do something great. Like, we all have that ambition in our life. At some point, I want to be the greatest at this. I want to do this and be awesome at it. And we all have that goat mentality. We want to be the greatest. The Bible actually talks about this, what it takes to be the greatest. And it's in Matthew chapter 23, verse 11. This is what it means to be the goat. It says, the greatest among you will be your servant. And when you read this, I mean, this doesn't make sense in culture today, in real life today, when you don't apply the biblical application for it. But when you look at this, you're like, okay, to be the greatest, you have to be the least. I mean, because the servant is the low man on the totem pole. He is the least. He has to be the most humble person in the room because everybody's above him. And so it says, the greatest among you will be your servant. So to be great, we have to be humble and serve. But that's not what we would look at as greatness. Right? If we were to put on and look at TV and look at people's lives, you know, what's great is somebody who's successful in business. What's somebody who's successful in music or in athletics, or somebody who's got the perfect house and the nice cars and all those things. That would be somebody that we look at and go, they're great. They're great at what they do. And we look at that and say, that's what greatness looks like. But yet, Jesus makes the statement that the greatest among you will be your servants. So the question that I ask is, what are you always doing? Changes in meaning. What are you always doing? In Acts chapter 9, it says, in Joppa there was a disciple named Tabitha. And her name means Dorcas. She was always doing good and helping the poor. That's pretty much all that's said about her. But how awesome and profound is that statement? Like, Tabitha, she's always doing good and helping the poor. What are we always doing? Are we always doing good? Are we always helping the poor? Are we always helping the least of these? Are we doing, what is it we are doing and spending our time doing? Instead, are we always serving self? Are we always serving others? How do we become a faithful servant? I want to look at three things in the Bible, three stories, three statements that go with those stories. The first one is bring a lunch. Okay? The first story is about a guy who brought a lunch. And not that lunch that fed 5,000 people and all that. The other lunch. And this was a story, and we find it in Samuel, 1 Samuel 17:17. It's about a guy named David. And the interesting thing, what is known about David is he slayed a giant, probably first and foremost. Second thing he's known for is he was a great king. He was a warrior. He won great battles. But the thing that we don't realize is that it didn't start out that way for him. And here's what it says, is one day Jesse said to David, take this basket of roasted grain and these 10 loaves of bread and carry them quickly to your brothers. See how your brothers are getting along, and bring back a report on how they are doing. See, the thing when you read this is just a shepherd boy who was asked, he was the low man on the totem pole, he got asked to bring the lunch to his brothers. But see, the thing that I take from this is that his story starts off very humble. He wanted to win the battle, but first you have to carry the basket. Right? He had to start off humbly going, okay, I'm going to take this to my brothers. And I'm going to bring this to them, and not knowing that if he didn't do it, he may not have been who he ended up being. We can't know that for sure, but we can put these things together that it started off by him taking this basket and being humble and saying, I'm going to take this lunch to my brothers. Would he have eventually won the battle? Would he eventually have done those things? Like I said, we can't know for sure, but he had to start somewhere, and it was being humble. Want to be great? Be insignificant. Out of the spotlight, others focus. Want to be great? Be selfless. That's what this story teaches us, is that he had to start off humbly to get to where he wanted to be, and he had to bring a lunch to do it. The second story is offer a ride. And this story is about Jesus. It's interesting because Zechariah declared 553 years before this occurred that Jesus would come riding in on a donkey, that the king would come in on a donkey. And the reason I bring this story up is because that doesn't make much sense for a king to ride in on a donkey. He should have rode in on a white horse in that time frame. If we were to modernize it, he would have come in with a nice limo, armor-plated, maybe some spinners on the side, I don't know, depending on how flashy you wanted to be, with paparazzi everywhere, with armed guards all around. He would have made an entrance with a crown and a robe because he was the king. And yet he says in Luke 19:31, it says, if anyone asks why you are untying it, say the Lord needs it. He didn't even own the donkey, he borrowed the donkey. He just borrowed the donkey. It wasn't his donkey to begin with, and yet he said the Lord needs it, and so he rode in on this donkey, and this demonstrates who he came and why he came, because he came to be the king, but he did not act like a king. He started off, that's what Christmas is all about. He came as a baby, and he wasn't born in a castle. He was born in a manger. It's funny because God didn't shout out to everybody and say, hey, rich people, hey, the royal and the famous, like, the king is born, go see him. He said, hey, shepherds, go look at the king. Now, eventually some wise men came to see him, but he didn't come to act like a king. He came and humbled himself to be a man for you and I, so that he could be the ultimate sacrifice for us. That's what that story shows us is that he came humbly, not like royalty. So first thing is you got to bring a lunch, offer a ride. And the last one's about Jesus as well, and it's you have to carry a towel. This one's interesting because before the Passover happened, they all got together in an upper room, and we know this story. But the interesting thing is they went to this upper room and they were going to have the Passover feast. And they started bickering a little bit. They kind of started saying, well, who's going to be the greatest among us? Like, who's going to do the most among us? They started, John and Peter and all these guys, Bartholomew, were just arguing about this. And Jesus gets up, doesn't say a word, takes off his outer cloak. And this is what it says. In John 13:4-5, it says, so Jesus got up from the meal, took off his outer cloak, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured the water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet. When we think about this story, it's like, wow, that's pretty cool. But if we really think about the significance of the story, here's the thing to put it into perspective of this time. This was the job for the lowest servant. Probably the newest guy, the guy that's paid the least. This is the servant's job. And they rented this house, so they didn't have servants to serve them, because why no one wanted to do this job is because their feet were disgusting, not just because they walked around on dirt roads, but because they didn't have proper sewage systems. And so their dirt roads weren't muddy roads. They had other things in the road. And that's why, people say, well, are we better healthy-wise because of modern medicine and all these things? Yes, absolutely. But we also have better hygiene than we did back then, and better drainage and all those things. And so these guys could easily get sick if they didn't clean their feet because of what was on their feet. And so no one wanted to clean the feet. And so the crazy thing about this story is that they're arguing about who's the greatest, like who's going to do the most. They're having an argument, and Jesus just stands up and puts on a towel, pours some water, doesn't say a word, because there's no words needed. It just starts to wash their feet. And the other thing that's so amazing about this story is that he was showing them and demonstrating to them his love for them. But did he really need to do that? Because tomorrow he was going to go be beaten, he was going to go be stripped, he was going to be bruised, and then killed, demonstrating his love for us. And yet he took this opportunity to say, it's not about who is the greatest. It's about who's going to be the most humble. Who's going to get down on their knees and help the least of these. Jesus said this. He goes, look around you. He says, when I was naked, did you clothe me? When I was naked, you clothed me. When I was hungry, you fed me. They said, well, when did we do that, Jesus? When did we do that? He said, when you did it for the least of these. When you did it for the lowly, you did it unto me. And that's the point of this. You want to be the greatest. See, we can look at what greatness looks like in the world's eyes, or we can look at what greatness looks like to God. And there's a contrast there. Is we're going to look at it and go, you know what, the people in this world that put others before themselves, that humble themselves, that turn the other cheek, when they easily have the right to punch back. And God's going to look at them and go, they're the greatest among you. The crazy thing about this is this is Jesus who did this. He wrapped the towel around his waist. And not because of his entitlement did he have to do this. He didn't have to do this. He was entitled to not do this because he was the Son of God, the living water, the Lamb of God, the true vine, the bread of life. He was the light of the world, the living stone. He was the King of glory, the Prince of peace, the great high priest, the righteous judge, the chosen one, the King of kings, the Lord of lords, the Alpha, the Omega, the Redeemer, the Rock. Need I go on? He was the righteous one. He got down on his knee and washed their feet. And if he can do it, then why don't we do it? Why don't we do it? He didn't come to be served. He came to serve. Will we bring a lunch? Will we offer a ride? Will we carry a towel? When we serve others, you serve Christ. That's what that passage says. So what are you always doing? It's a question to reflect on. What are we always doing? Are we always holding babies? Are we always greeting guests? Are we opening doors? Are we carrying people's bags? Are we welcoming strangers? Are we making people food? Are we loving on teenagers even when that's really hard to do? Do we read to children? Do we cook meals for other people? Do we take those simple things that seem simple but can have an impact on someone's life? Do we take those opportunities? Are we always doing those things? The common response is this: I'm just so busy. And it's a legit response. We have busy lives. We have things going on. We have responsibilities. And Jesus addresses this. He addresses this in Luke chapter 10, verse 38. It says, as Jesus and his disciples were on their way, he came to a village where a woman named Martha opened her home to him. She had a sister called Mary, who sat at the Lord's feet listening to what he said. But Martha was distracted by all the preparation that had to be made. She came to him and asked, Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do the work by myself? Tell her to help me. And this is Jesus' reply. Martha, Martha. The Lord answered, you are worried and upset about many things, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. What is this whole passage about? Priorities. Priorities. Was it bad what Martha was doing? Was it bad that she was running around preparing probably the meal for them and helping the guests and all those things? She was serving Jesus. Really, she was serving Jesus. She was helping prepare the meal and get things cleaned up and all these things. She's the one that opened the house up. And so she's running around doing these things. And that's the thing. We run around doing things, many things, and most of them aren't bad. They're not bad things. They're not negative things. They're not sinful things. They're not things that, you look at and go, well, it's not a bad thing that they do that. Like, it's no big deal that they spend their time doing those things. But what is the most important thing? He says you spend most of your time worrying and upset about many things. We spend our time worrying and upset about so many things. But he responds and says, but few things are needed, or indeed only one. I think it's interesting because he says, there's few things needed. Well, actually, really, there's only one thing needed. Few, really, only one. All of these things that we spend our lives worrying about, upset about, the thing that we need to realize is that the things we're worried about today, the things we're upset about today, probably in the grand scheme of things, won't even matter to us tomorrow, or a week, or a year, or 5 years from now. We won't even remember those things. But his reply is, Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. That's profound right there. She has chosen what is best. She has chosen the one thing, and she cannot lose that. No matter what happens in life, in 5 years from now, she'll remember that time sitting at Jesus' feet. She won't remember the busyness of what they ate that day. And I think that's a great reminder for us, because there are some times that we self-inflict what we worry about, what we get upset about, and it doesn't matter. If we were to reprioritize and look at our life and go, what really matters? And that's what we usually do at the new beginning of a year, is take and look at our life and say, what matters most? What am I known for doing? Do I like that? Do I want to change that? Do I want this year to be different? Do I want to worry less and serve more? Do I want to busy myself with things that don't really matter, or focus on what truly matters? It's an easy statement to do. It's an easy thing to say, but what we worry about tomorrow won't matter in eternity. And that's the bottom line. What we worry about tomorrow, it's interesting because we worry about these things, and these aren't bad things, but we set up security systems on our homes. We make sure that we have good savings so that if anything were to happen, we would have something to fall back on and our family would be taken care of. We have life insurance policies in case something happens so that our family would be taken care of. We do all of these things to have security for today, but what are we doing about our security for eternity? What are we doing that matters for eternity? That's a hard thing to swallow. That's a thing for us to think about. What are we doing that will matter in 5 years from now? Because really, when it's all said and done, as a Christ follower, the only thing we want is when we are in face-to-face with Jesus, we want him to say, well done, good and faithful servant. The greatest among you will be your servant. If you want to be the goat, we need to follow the example of the lamb. If we want to be the goat, we need to follow the example of our king. And that is to serve those around us, to love those around us, to look for opportunities, to pause and reflect and say, you know what, instead of running from here to there, do I look for opportunities to love those around me, to serve those in need? Let's have the band come back up. Let's bow our heads and close our eyes. This morning, as we reflect on this question of what are we known for, what do we want to be known for? We can choose to be known for things that we accomplish, or we can choose to be known for people that accomplish the work of Christ. Heavenly Father, I just thank you. I thank you for today. I thank you that we can come here. God, I know that this is a tough question. This is a gut-wrenching question. This is a tough thing to swallow, because this is shooting to the core of it. What is it that we busy our lives with? What is it that we worry about? What is it that we get upset about, but that does not matter? God, help us bring those to the forefront of our minds, the things that we could weed out, the things that we could put to the side. Not everything is bad, but not everything is good either. And not everything will be good for our eternity and for your purpose for our lives. If we want to be the greatest, God, humble us today. Give us opportunities today to slow down, to pause, to reflect, to say, God, I want you to use me to help the least of these. It's not going to be easy. It's not going to be comfortable. But God, give me the boldness to humble myself, to say, you know what, I want to be known for, just like Tabitha, I want to be known for doing good and helping the poor. I want to be known for loving those around me. I want to be known for my yes being my yes and my no being my no. I want to be known for a person that trusts in God in all circumstances. I want to be known for a person that said, you know what, I don't see how this is going to work out, but God, I know you are in it and you are faithful from the beginning. God, help us to be those people today. Help us to serve those around us. Look for opportunities to do that. Help us to be more like you. In your name we pray.